Boldwood presents Saved. Written by Peter Shilton and Steph Shilton, and read by Julie Macy and David Thorpe. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Forward. Gary Lineker, OBE. I was 7 years old when my dad and granddad took me to Filbert Street for the first time. That first walk up the stairs, that first sight of the terraces, that first smell of professional football, that first glimpse of the hallowed green rectangle. It was unforgettable, it was thrilling, it was magical. All enhanced by the fact that the visitors were Manchester United, the United of Best, Charlton and Law. But it was not the Holy Trinity that caught this young man's eye that day. It was the Leicester goalkeeper. My dad told me he was a local lad like me. I was transfixed. He was incredible. He had such extraordinary agility and made save after save. I told my dad I wanted to be a goalkeeper like Peter Shilton. Of course, that did not happen, but whenever I played with my younger brother Wayne in the garden, I was always in goal. I soon realised that I would not be big enough to be between the sticks and eventually ended up disliking goalkeepers. They all too often got in the way. I never disliked Peter Shilton, though. He was my boyhood hero. I was heartbroken when he left Leicester around my 14th birthday. Little did I know that some 10 years later I would be sharing a room with the great man whilst on England duty. We were roommates for 6 years, two Leicester lads living their dreams. Shilts, yes, he had become Shilts to me at that point, retired from international football after the World Cup in Italy in 1990 as the most capped English player in history. We had a wonderful friendship with the odd hilarious moment. Shilts will recall us attempting to make a film in Mexico during the 1986 World Cup for ITV. I was to serve him some afternoon tea on a silver platter, the joke being that I was the goalie's lackey. Yes, he was the goalie on my team now, and therefore did what he asked, which was largely true. Filming started, and I hid in the bathroom ready to come out with my platter and pour his tea. It took us about 100 takes. Every time I sneaked out of the bathroom, we burst into laughter. We just could not do it without one or both of us giggling. And then there was the time we got shafted by the rest of the England squad at Italia 90. To keep everyone occupied and to alleviate boredom, there were no mobile phones, no internet and no computer games back then, we did various activities. One that was very popular was race nights. Fred Street, the England physio at the time, had tapes of old race meetings from various parts of the world. Peter and I were the bookies, imaginatively called Honest Shilts and Links. I had had some experience of running a book, and, as bookmakers do, we made sure that we were well in front. Then came the sting. Fred allowed Gaza to see the result of the last race. Everyone placed their bets on a number of horses. The big hitters, though, were waiting for the odds to drift out on the horse they knew would win. Eventually, when the odds were around 10 to 1, in they came. Big bet after big bet was placed. Shilts and I looked at each other and feared the worst. Not even Peter Shilton could save this one. As the winner crossed the finishing line, the entire squad were doing the conga around the swimming pool in celebration. The remarkable aspect of Shilts' remarkable contribution to football is not just his obvious brilliance or the many trophies he won, but the longevity of his career. I'd watched him most weeks since I was 7, and yet when I retired from playing the game, Shilts was still playing. In total, he notched up an extraordinary 1,000 league games. This book, I know, is not just about his football career, but other more serious matters. I was aware that Shilts loved a bet. How could I not be? Quite frequently, when we were visiting, he would ask me to leave the room as he wanted to put his horse racing bets on privately. Later, I found out that gambling had become a problem for him and that it had cost him an awful lot. I am delighted that Shilts has addressed his addiction and is now raising awareness of the dangers of gambling. There has never been a more important time to shine a light on the dark side of betting. Football is awash with bookmakers' adverts and sponsorships, and they suck people into a world that can lead to misery and desperation. It's deeply concerning. So this book is a most welcome contribution to the efforts to highlight the perils of gambling. I am as proud of Peter Shilton now as I was on that first day at Filbert Street. Well played, goalie. Introduction. In this powerful memoir, Peter Shilton, England's record cap holder, opens his heart and reveals how his 45-year addiction to gambling nearly destroyed him and how the love and support of his wife Steph enabled him to turn his life around and defeat his demons. This is the story of how he was saved, how he saved himself, and how Steph's love saved him. Peter admits to his self-destructive obsession with gambling and tells the inspiring story of how he was able to overcome his secret and silent addiction. It is a book that offers hope for others suffering or heading along the same downward spiral. Peter found himself again and discovered how to beat his dark addiction. Steph, formerly an NHS manager for more than 20 years, knows that as the wife of an addict, she can help raise awareness in several public health areas. She now wants to reach out to anyone affected by a partner's gambling to help them too. For the first time, the wife of one of football's greatest ever players tells her side of the story. This book is as much about Steph as it is about Peter. It's a story of chronic addiction seen from both sides, but with an uplifting ending. Steph offers advice to the loved ones of people struggling with addiction and reveals how she worked tirelessly to help Peter tackle his. The book is also about the Shiltons' campaign and their work with the government and the charity Gambling with Lives in the battle to prevent the scourge of suicides associated with gambling addictions, as well as the associated mental health issues. Saved has a distinct purpose: to highlight the dangers of gambling when it becomes an addiction, not just in the privileged world of football, but in all walks of life. The Shiltons want to confront football's unhealthy relationship with gambling. The game's establishment takes tens of millions of pounds from the gambling industry in the form of advertising revenue and sponsorship fees. It's time to address the issue and make a real change. Prologue. Pete's story. There I stood, aged about 9, with my mum and younger brother, looking up and watching my dad charging towards us at the fairground, waving his hands high in the air, his face beaming with excitement. "I've won!" he said. We had the joy of being on holiday in Mablethorpe and the fun of all the rides at the fairground, and now we were an ecstatic little family celebrating Dad's lucky spell on the horses. Ironically, at the time of his win, I was in the arcade. Did this moment sow the seeds in me that pushed me to be forever chasing that big win? Why not? Winning ran through my every vein for as long as I can remember. I possessed the goal on the football pitch, standing between the posts, evaluating the opponents, studying their performance. The goal, it belonged to me. Within minutes, I could weigh the danger of any player on the pitch, protecting my area like a wild predator. "Come on, try and beat me," was etched my entire mind as I dominated my area. I was on guard. Every inch of my body and mind was on high alert. I could never be beaten. I had to win. Every shot thrown at me, I countered with determination and intensity. I had to succeed. Winning was crucial to my very existence. From when I was very young, I was always obsessed in my art of goalkeeping and fixated on never losing a match. A million miles away from my professional world lay a dark and lonely place. This world crept up on me very gradually. I guess it started as a hobby, but it grew into yet another obsession. Only this one would most certainly end badly. It would cost me almost everything. I eventually ended up living in a nightmare which cruelly overtook my entire life and well-being, like a disease spreading through me. With the continued desire to win driving me, I felt I couldn't go any lower. The reality of not winning began shadowing my thoughts. All this was happening as I welcomed a wonderful new lady to my life. Not only did I think she was beautiful, but she was such wonderful company and great fun to be with. I was totally in love with her. In my heart, I knew that my need to win and beat the bookie meant that I ran the risk of losing the love of my life. And so, an agonising tug-of-war began.
Steph's story. As I walked along the long carpeted corridor towards the lifts, I looked out of the windows to see the floodlit site of a golf course. Being a keen golfer, I had a pang of regret at not having packed my beloved golf clubs. I had to remind myself I was there to relax and sing. As I approached the lift doors, they opened, and there stood an older gentleman. Little did I know that very second had sealed my fate, because there stood the man who I was about to go on an incredible journey with and be with for the rest of my life. I was about to enter into a complete overhaul of the world I knew, but I would also be stepping into a dark world which had the potential to destroy us both. Further along our timeline together, I found myself walking along another long corridor. This one didn't have a plush carpet, but pictures of what looked like football legends decorated the walls. As I held Pete's hand, guiding me down the busy tunnel, I noticed a prominent picture of Pete plastered all over part of the corridor wall. My jaw must have hit the floor as I froze and exclaimed, "That's you!" He laughed and responded, "Yes, Steph, I told you I'd played a bit in my time." With my head in a whirl, walking briskly and hand in hand with Pete and the FA officials at Wembley Stadium, I found myself at the end of the dark tunnel, standing in the stadium with Wembley's pitch in front of me, surrounded by 90,000 chanting football fans. Never had I experienced such enormity. The sound alone was overwhelming. My heart was literally pounding. As I turned back to look into the tunnel, the entire England squad were all lined up, charged and ready to run onto the greatest football pitch in England. The team all nodded in respect to Pete, as one by one they made their way into the arena. My first experience of the football world, and here I was. The small bubble I had lived in had just burst forever. Life, as I knew it, would now never be the same. Everything had changed. But my new bubble would burst one sunny August day just a few years on. The postman arrived with a bundle of letters. Whilst checking through them, I noticed a bank statement addressed to Pete. He was working in India, thousands upon thousands of miles away from me, and there I sat with his bank statement sealed in an envelope now in my hands. For 3 days, I repeatedly picked it up from the mantelpiece where I'd placed it. I kept holding it, telling myself I should open it. I knew that finally this envelope would reveal the truth to me. It held all of the answers of months and months of anxious questions. Here, in one white envelope, lay my future, but also my deepest fears. Finally, after agonising with myself and terrified that my worst concerns might be true, with shaking hands, I nervously sat alone in our quiet home and slowly opened the envelope. I knew it was wrong. It was such an intrusion on my beloved Pete. But in my mind I knew it was the right thing to do. There, In front of me lay the answers in factual black and white, page after page.
The first half. Our message of hope. The reason for writing this book is to deliver a message through these pages to those suffering due to gambling addiction. Do not despair. There is a way out, and support is at hand. We are here, ready to support and understand. We are not qualified counsellors, but we are highly qualified in living through the experience of gambling addiction. We intend this to be a self-help book, not just for elite sportsmen, but also for every ordinary person out there who finds themselves hooked on gambling. We wrote this book for the gambling addict to help them realise and appreciate there is a way out of their seemingly never-ending nightmare, and that it is possible to turn your life around. It is also for those loved ones close to the addict. We want to support the partners, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers and friends of gambling addicts who suffer such torment and give them tools to help them with their life change by finding a way out for the gambling addict. It's also intended to educate everybody about the perils of gambling and gambling addiction. We are not anti-gambling. Gambling sensibly, moderately and for fun is fine. It can be a form of relaxation and an acceptable hobby, providing it is within your means and in moderation. Having a bet for a stake you can afford now and again is perfectly fine and good fun. There are many who can bet reasonably and within their limits. However, regrettably, more and more are betting outside of their limits. Trust us, we know how that can happen. When it gets out of hand, it can be life-changing, debilitating, financially crippling and can, in some cases, lead to extreme actions like suicide. Gambling is becoming an epidemic. It is an illness, a disease, and needs to be recognised as such. It is an addiction, just like alcohol or drug addiction. There is no difference. You could say it's actually much worse because it is so hidden, so secretive. If someone is hooked on alcohol or drugs, you can often see it. It's evident in the way they walk, talk, or the way they look. But gambling is much more clandestine. Betting beyond your means can lead to real crisis and much, much worse. We are writing as a victim of gambling addiction for 45 years and as a partner who subsequently became a victim. So we know that there is a feeling of loneliness, isolation and hopelessness. But there is hope. And we believe that this book will be the start of the process that an addict needs to begin in order to come through it. The time is right to open up about the real extent of the damage this addiction can have, but it's also time to shine a light on how there is a way through it. For both of us, many a tear has been shed while discussing the situation from both sides, the addict and the addict's partner. It's been truly a game of two halves to work together to tell the story of the thing that had eaten into our lives for so many years. It has been tough, unburdening the truth, but extremely cathartic. It has equally been a relief, almost a form of counselling for both of us to get everything off our chests, confront the demons and the staggering losses with the online bookie, to experience the realisation and then the redemption. It is said that love conquers all. Well, it conquered the 45-year gambling addiction of a man who had squandered almost all his entire lifetime's achievements and fortune without really knowing he was doing it. Like any addict, be it to drugs or alcohol, the final cut-off point, or the tipping point, was the hardest of all. The decision to quit, then when you say it, to mean it. That was 6 years ago. And since then, not a single penny has been squandered with the bookies, and we have never been happier. For us, this is also a love story. The chance meeting in a lift, how we fell in love, our white wedding, our idyllic romantic honeymoon. There will be some football, some funny stories, and some inside track within these pages, but that is about all. This book is something completely different to memoirs that have come before because it has a purpose, a vision, and an important message. A potentially life-saving message. We want change. No, we demand change. And we are campaigning vigorously for change. There will be the average punter who likes a bet now and again. It's a hobby, a relaxation for a lot of people. They love to go to the races, and they bet within their limits. They might even be too tight to spend too much. But the very nature of gambling is that it can become addictive and compulsive, and for many can do so all too easily. With online betting, you can be sitting on the beach, pick up your phone and gamble. You can be just about anywhere and gamble. The issue is not how much you gamble, how often, but if you can afford to gamble. We are working with people who can facilitate change to discuss helping to tackle the menace of gambling, including Carolyn Harris MP, the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on gambling-related harm. We are also working with the charity Gambling with Lives, which was set up by the bereaved parents of gamblers. Whilst the betting companies see their profits soaring, many of their customers are finding themselves in misery and trapped in a compulsive betting snare. More and more lives will be ruined. There will be more and more suicides. A whole new generation of children caught in the betting trap. More families devastated, unless there are adequate regulations brought in and quickly. Gambling is a hugely profitable industry. The companies have recently made moves to ensure clients' safety and well-being, but much of this is largely public relations. The key aim is to make as much money as possible. They might say safeguards are in place, but clearly they don't go far enough. Clearly they are not working well enough. There needs to be more, much more. How many lives will be lost before real effective action is taken? How can it be good enough when pop-up adverts, free spins of the wheel, free bets and other such aggressive advertising is still being sent to vulnerable and addictive gamblers? How can the industry be taking responsibility when more and more ill-protected youngsters are committing suicide? All this at the same time as measures are taken so they either close down or curtail their stakes on accounts that might be on a winning streak. The epidemic is with us right now, and the knock-on effect is that it will put extra strain on the NHS and our already stretched mental health resources. There will be more patients needing treatment for depression and much worse. We all know the consequences of drug taking, alcohol abuse, excessive smoking. But gambling seems to still be under the radar for the medical consequences it is causing. The betting industry needs to be held to account. There needs to be much greater safeguards, less self-interest and less focus on the huge amounts of revenue the gambling industry brings into the government. For so many years, there was a reluctance to highlight the dangers of smoking and introduce curbs on the advertising of cigarettes, place warning notices on the packages, and then ban smoking in indoor public spaces. How long did it take to persuade the government to enforce these measures? Too long. It's now the same with gambling. There is too much advertising, and it's often too aggressive. In this aspect, football has to be held accountable too, as there is far too much sponsorship from the gambling industry. Far too many team shirts are advertising and pushing gambling on the football fans, many of whom are children. Children are getting hooked on gambling very easily. We were appalled to learn the story of a teenager who took his own life because he was hooked on gambling at the age of just 17. Children love their smartphones, and on those they can gamble whenever and wherever they might be. Vulnerable children are prone to take up gambling. In July 2020, a House of Lords report estimated that around 55,000 children have a gambling habit that is out of control right now in the UK, and it's getting worse. There needs to be more education in schools about this problem. So this is our story. But it's also a call for understanding and change. We met, fell in love, and after that we faced our greatest challenge. The old cliché is true. Love does conquer all. We want this book to show the thousands, if not millions of people currently hooked on gambling that there is a way out, and we can help you find it. Chapter 1. Uplifting. Pete's story. It was a chance encounter at an event that changed my life completely. I was booked as a guest speaker at the lavish Stoke-by-Nayland Hotel Golf and Spa that is idyllically located in the Dedham Vale area of outstanding natural beauty in the countryside just outside of Colchester. It must have been fate, as it was here that I met Steph, my own natural beauty, purely by chance. It was to be a life-changing encounter. I was speaking at a Rotary Club dinner taking place at the hotel. I had another personal appearance commitment the following day, ironically opening a Corals betting shop in Kent. So I was determined to have an early night and make an early getaway the next morning. This is why fate played such a hand here. Normally, I like to drive home after a long evening working as a guest speaker. I would normally be driving back in the early hours when the traffic is light and the roads are clearer, with the adrenaline still kicking in from the personal appearance. But this time, due to the personal appearance scheduled the next day, I opted to take up the offer of the overnight stay. It was rare I stayed overnight, and even though I was living on my own, it was usually my preference to go back home. I was all dressed up, looking like James Bond. Well, I wish, in my dicky bow tie and tuxedo. Whenever I'm on duty as a guest speaker, I am aware that people at the event want a memento of the evening, and so, as usual, I was carrying a wallet of photographs that I could easily sign and distribute. I was going down in the lift when the door opened and in stepped Steph with some girlfriends. Next thing, I'm there standing next to Steph. She looked stunning, gorgeous. And you know that instant feeling that there is some sort of connection. I felt it, especially when she made me laugh when she asked, "Are you a musician?" I discovered later that Steph was a jazz singer and that there was also a music convention at the hotel, which was the reason why Steph and her friends were spending a couple of nights at the venue as part of a girls' spa break. "No," I replied, "I'm a speaker." "What are you speaking about?" "I'm speaking about football." It was hugely refreshing that Steph didn't know who I was and had no idea why anyone would be talking about football at a hotel. Later, after the dinner, I was chatting with the organiser and enjoying a glass of red wine as I was not driving home that night. My plan was to finish my drink and get off to bed. But the organiser was very agreeable and persuaded me to allow him to top up my glass. I had just put my head in the large restaurant bar to see if there was any sport on the TV when I spotted Steph sitting there on her own whilst her friends mingled. "Hello," said Steph when she spotted me. "Would you like to join me?" There was a group of golfers in the corner of the bar, and it was clear they knew who I was, even though Steph was still very much in the dark. I don't know if her friends had recognised me. Probably not. As the evening wore on, I discovered Steph was a singer and that people had been waiting for her to perform and were encouraging her to come up to sing. Later, Steph told me that she wouldn't normally have been keen to get up and sing, but she confessed that she wanted to because she wanted to impress me. The song she chose was Mr. Bojangles. When she finished, she got a lovely round of applause from everybody in the bar, including me. Someone shouted, "Go on, Peter, help her off the stool." And then one of the golfers called out, "Don't drop her, Peter." And his group of golfing pals laughed. I am pretty sure Steph still didn't have an inkling about who I was and must have been wondering what all that was about, but she still laughed at the banter in the room. Later, while we were chatting away, Steph became inquisitive about my wallet of photographs, and she asked, "What's in there?" I told her it was filled with photos of myself. We had a few drinks, and at the end of the night we exchanged numbers. Before we said goodnight that evening, I reached down, handed one of the pictures to her, and told her that I used to play a bit of football. I still don't think she was any the wiser. Well, that was it, really. That was our first meeting. Maybe, if I hadn't had my glass filled and been persuaded to have one last glass of red in the bar, I would have probably gone to bed happily enough and not gone to the restaurant bar. Then again, if Steph hadn't walked into that lift, she wouldn't have walked into my life. It was as if somebody up there was determined to throw us together. It was definitely fate that brought us together. We immediately got on well. I thought she had such a great personality, and there was clearly something that clicked between us. There was a chemistry, you could tell. It was always my intention to contact her and to see if it led to anything. What did I have to lose? Not long afterwards, I texted her, suggesting that it would be great if I could see her again. I lived on my own at the time, and I used to pop along to my local, a lovely oldie-worldy pub, a couple of times a week to have a pint of Guinness, some fish and chips, and study the Racing Post. Instead of reading the paper, I started using this time to text Steph. I began chatting to her, and we were laughing and smiling all the time. The two lovely elderly waitresses, used to seeing me on my own studying my newspaper, must have noticed I was on my phone and wondered what I was up to. They kept smiling at me, and I could tell they were thinking, "What's going on? He's up to something. He must be on the phone to a lady." Well, that's exactly what was going on. That was me arranging our first proper date.
Steph's story. It's amazing how your whole life can change in just one moment. A chance meeting can lead to lasting love, and that's what happened for me and Pete. The moment I set eyes on him, I just knew we'd be together. And our love story started right there in that lift. It was in February 2012, and I was away with a group of girlfriends for a weekend break at a lovely hotel and spa in the countryside just outside of Colchester. I'd been single for a long time, and my daughter, Missy, had always been my priority. We had just welcomed a beautiful granddaughter, Summer, into the family, and Missy was settled with her partner, Dean. I knew their relationship was completely solid, and I knew they would have a long, secure future together and a beautiful little family. So I knew that, for the first time in years, it was my time to move on. Having hit my early 40s, I felt able to do things for myself for the first time in years. I thought I might start travelling more, and even felt I would be open to a lasting relationship. I knew I wanted to meet someone on my travels. I was a focused career woman, working as a manager in the NHS. I could support myself as I had a good income. I was very serious about my career and have always had a strong work ethic. But there is another side of my personality, the singer and performer. When I sang, it could appear that I was always happy and bubbly and having a great time. I loved what I was doing, but often that would be a front. I had good friends and loved a night out, but deep down I was actually lonely and realised that I had been for such a long time. I told Missy that I was at a point in my life when I felt ready to see more of the world and I wanted to start travelling, and that deep down I hoped that I would meet someone on my travels and someone I was willing to commit to. At last, at 43 years old, I was ready to start a new chapter in my life, and I really felt that I wanted some excitement. Despite working full-time, I still found time to relax, and one of those occasions was that weekend away with some girlfriends. There was a jazz weekend on at the hotel with an open mic jamming session. I was really looking forward to having the chance to sing, as well as having some relaxing me time with the girls in the spa, as we had booked in quite a few treatments. On the Friday evening, the girls and I booked into the hotel and made reservations in the restaurant. We got ready and were all in a really good mood. When the doors to the lift opened on our floor, we all piled into the small lift. Being the smallest amongst them, I was squashed in and pressed right up against this really good-looking man who was tall and handsome. We were all giggling, and all I could say to him was, "Hi, nice to meet you." He laughed, as we were obviously all in a good mood, and he came across as really nice. I was crammed right up against him. He was wearing a tuxedo, and I noticed that he had a small case with him, which I thought had an instrument in it or music sheets, so I assumed he was with a band for the jazz night. I remember looking at his hands and noted that his fingers were slightly bent upwards. I wondered if he might be a pianist or a clarinet, trumpet or saxophone player. I said to him, "Are you with the jazz band? I'll be singing tonight, so hopefully I'll see you there." He laughed and said that he wasn't a musician, but he would be speaking that evening. I thought that was really odd and asked him what he would be speaking about. And when he said it was football, I replied, "Oh, how dull." Of course, I had absolutely no idea who he was, and he just cracked up when I said that. When we got out of the lift on the ground floor, he went his way and my friends and I went ours, but not before I told him it was nice to meet him, and he said likewise. Although it was just a short lift ride, I could tell there was chemistry between us. My girlfriends had been chatting and laughing amongst themselves, but because Pete and I were pressed up against each other, facing each other, it had felt like we were in our own little bubble. During dinner, I kept thinking about him. I was sure he had been joking and winding me up, and that he really was a musician, because I couldn't imagine anyone doing a talk about football. Of course, I realised that there were different functions going on in the hotel at the same time, but I have to admit, at that time, I didn't even like football. After dinner, my friends and I went to the main bar, which was absolutely packed. Everyone was mingling and there was a great atmosphere in the room. At one point, I was sitting alone with a glass of wine, happily people watching. After a while, in walked Pete, and he recognised me from our meeting in the lift. I was in a really good mood, and it felt natural to say, "Oh, it's you again. Would you like to join me?" There was something intriguing about this man, and I really wanted to find out more about him. The conversation just flowed. We quickly established we were both single. There was no game playing, we were completely honest. We talked non-stop, and bells started to go off for me. Could this person become someone very special? I was aware that he was a bit older than me. There was almost a 20-year difference between us, and I wondered if that age gap might be a bit too much. There was real banter between us, and it felt so relaxed and normal, like neither of us was trying too hard. I'm quite a private person, but the two of us really opened up. We talked about our pasts and our feelings about life. It was as if we'd known each other for ages. To be able to be so open and honest with a complete stranger made me realise that this could develop into something very special. As we were chatting, I asked him about his background and what he did, and he said, "I used to play a bit of football, It's hilarious to me now that at the time I had yet to find out what a legendary football star he really was. He totally played down his amazing career that first evening. Looking back, although I didn't know how famous he was, he didn't once show off or keep talking about himself. I didn't feel that he was trying to impress me. He was just totally natural. He kept bringing the conversation back round to me and asking about my background and career. I made it clear that I was independent and took my work very seriously, so he knew I wasn't a dolly bird. The bar was so busy and we were engrossed in our conversation, but I still became aware of people looking at us, especially the men who obviously knew who Pete was. It was then time for me to take the mic. Although I can be quite shy in private, I'm much more confident when I'm on stage. I sang the classic Mr. Bojangles, which so many people love, and it was a hit with the audience. When I went to step down from the stool, my friend turned to Pete and said, "Aren't you going to go and help her down?" There was a lot of hooting and laughter from the men who called out, "Don't drop her!" With hindsight, I realised they were joking about the fact that he was a famous goalkeeper. At the time, I just laughed along. I thought he was so sweet, and I felt a true connection with this man. There was a lot of cheering, but I just thought the audience was showing appreciation of my voice. Pete and I talked for hours. It was strange because I clearly remember that when I stared into his eyes, I saw a real loneliness, and he looked broken. We talked so much on that first night, which was very rare in my experience, but it felt so real. We understood each other. We immediately clicked. I felt a genuine trust between us. We spoke about our feelings in a way that most people wouldn't do on a first encounter. We both revealed our vulnerable sides without any embarrassment, which was so refreshing that it was astonishing. At the end of the evening, he walked me to my room, kissed me in a very gentlemanly way, and asked if he could get my number. At that point, I had butterflies and realised that I had thoroughly enjoyed his company and wanted to see him again. The next morning, my friends and I were on our way to have our spa treatments, so we were in the reception with our robes on when I bumped into Pete again as he was checking out. I suddenly felt a bit shy and awkward, and that's when I knew I really liked him. He told me how lovely it was meeting me and that he'd like to take me out. He had definitely made an impression on me, and despite the age difference, there was a real attraction between us. He asked me what I was going to be doing that evening, and I said, the same as last night. Then he made me laugh by saying, "Well, don't have a drink with any strange men in the bar." Then he gave me his number and asked me to ring him before saying goodbye.
Chapter 2. The First Date and New Beginnings. Pete's story. Steph suggested we stay at a hotel near Colchester. Years later, she would stay in that same hotel with her bridesmaids ahead of our wedding. The hotel had a golf course and was set in a lovely location. I was really looking forward to the opportunity to get to know Steph much better after all our texting and chats on the phone. Driving from my house in the Midlands, my mind was full of thoughts about where this was likely to go and how much I was looking forward to seeing Steph. I had a real feeling of optimism that this was a relationship that would prove to be long-lasting and something really special. We shared a connection, and we also shared the fact that we were both at the stage in our lives where we needed a strong relationship. I must be honest, I felt lonely at this point in my life. I was living alone in the Midlands, waiting to sell the house after my divorce. Steph told me she hadn't had a relationship for a while either. What didn't occur to me was whether it was fair to begin a relationship with Steph, or indeed anyone, when I had a problem I was hiding. In truth, I had no idea that I even had a problem at that stage. Why would I? until it actually became undeniable that I was addicted, that it was an illness, and that, in reality, I urgently needed help, I was oblivious to it all. It never entered my head that this was something I needed to confront or share. With hindsight, that was exactly what I needed, and eventually, with Steph by my side, that's what I got. So that day, I was happy, excited, and eagerly looking forward to seeing Steph again. It never crossed my mind that if, as I had hoped, the relationship developed, I would be burdening someone with my problems. I didn't see that I had a problem. I had a steady income at the time, as well as my football pension. It was not as though gambling was going to leave me destitute. Only now can I see this was part of the problem, not just for me, but anyone who is in the grip of an addiction, especially gambling addiction. There are no obvious signs of a problem to outsiders, and the addict either doesn't know they have a problem or is in total denial about it. That was me. As our relationship developed, Steph learned that I liked to bet, but had no clue to what extent until much further into our relationship. Until that moment, I didn't see how much it might impact on us. Until I sorted myself out, I honestly didn't realise that I had a problem. We got on so well during that first date. We had a lovely meal at the hotel and quickly rekindled the feeling we had from the very first meeting in the lift and our chat in the bar the night we'd first met. It was just as we had both hoped. What struck me most about Steph was her sense of humour and her caring and strong personality. Her character suited me, as I had a strong personality too, and was clearly obsessive. You have to be to make your way to the top in football. While Steph was fun and good company, she also had a highly responsible job with the NHS. We quickly developed a good relationship. We were made for each other. The age difference never seemed to become an issue. I'd always been physically fit and in good shape, so I felt young for my age. Then again, Steph is young for her age too. But the difference in our ages wasn't a problem. In fact, I don't think it has ever been discussed between us.
Steph's story. A couple of weeks after our first encounter, we went on our first date. Peter and I had had a really lovely time together on the first night we met, but I had sensed an unhappiness about him which I couldn't put my finger on. I was also a little bit worried about the age difference. I was getting a bit nervous about the idea. Pete booked rooms for us at a really lovely hotel near Mersey Island that I'd recommended. He wanted us to be able to relax, have a few drinks and not rush home. On the day I was due to meet Pete for dinner, I couldn't settle. I got all dressed up in a black dress and high heels in a bid to disguise my mere 5'1.5" height, then phoned Missy and said, "I can't do this. I'm going to have to cancel. He's really nice, but I'm just too nervous." Thank goodness for Missy, as she gave me the confidence to go for it. She said, "Mum, you can't back out of this. You can't do it to him. He's driven hundreds of miles to see you. You have to go and meet him. You'll be fine and you'll have a lovely time." She had a good vibe about it, so that really helped me. So I phoned Pete. He was driving and answered on the car speaker. I was completely honest with him. I told him that I was feeling very nervous. Later, he said that he found my vulnerability very endearing, but at the time he responded by saying that we were going to have a great time, so I shouldn't worry. I was waiting anxiously for him to arrive and started to think back to the first time we met. I remembered that he'd been wearing a tuxedo that night. I had no idea what he was going to look like when he turned up. He insisted on coming to pick me up at my house, and I was so relieved when I set eyes on him. He was just as handsome as I remembered. He was dressed casually but smartly in navy blue, which really suited him, and I thought he was actually even more handsome than I remembered him. Also, he didn't look as old as I'd remembered. In fact, he looked younger. He gave me a kiss on the cheek, and I noticed that he was shaking a little and looked a bit nervous too. He admitted that he hadn't been on a date in years. From the start, we were both transparent about our insecurities. When we arrived at the hotel, we didn't check in straight away. Pete suggested we have a glass of wine in the bar, which was a good way to calm our nerves. From that moment, we picked up where we left off. It was lovely. The conversation flowed and we couldn't stop laughing. It was obvious that we didn't take ourselves too seriously. Pete has since said that he liked the fact that back then I knew nothing about sports or his famous background, and he thought it was great that he didn't have to talk about football all night. Our first date was very much a secret. As being an NHS manager, I was used to keeping my private life very much away from my working life. They were totally separate, so only Missy and a close friend from the spa weekend knew about our date. The bar was busy as the hotel is a popular golf resort, and there were lots of men in there who had finished playing their rounds of golf. Pete suggested we move from the bar area into a quiet lounge. Unknown to me, at the time, he was trying to avoid being around fans. I thought he wanted to give all his attention to me, which I found quite endearing. He wanted to know all about my background and was especially interested in my career in the NHS. He really made a point of putting the focus on me and making me feel relaxed. Dinner was booked for us in the main restaurant. We were greeted by a restaurant manager and taken to a beautiful secluded table. It was very romantic, and I remember thinking, wow, this is amazing service.